The phone buzzed against the stainless steel counter where I was charting a patient's fluid intake. In the pediatric ward, every sound is calibrated. The gentle beep of an IV pump, the rhythmic sigh of a ventilator, the low murmur of parents reading stories. A phone's vibration is a foreign noise, an intrusion from a world where things are not so carefully measured. I glanced at the screen. It was my husband, Corey. One message. It's done. You'll thank me. You were too emotional about it. The words didn't register at first. They were just black marks on a bright screen. Done. What was done? I scanned my memory of the morning. Did I ask him to fix the leaky faucet? To call the insurance company? My mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by 12 hours of monitoring tiny heartbeats and administering medications in dosages calculated to the microgram. Then the context arrived, not as a thought, but as a physical sensation, a sudden, cold hollowing in my chest, as if someone had reached in and scooped out my lungs. Buster. He was talking about my dog, Buster. The room, which had been filled with the gentle hum of life-sustaining machinery, went completely silent. Or maybe it was just the sound in my own head that stopped. I could feel the eyes of another nurse on me, a question in her expression, but I couldn't look up. I just stared at the phone, at those 7 words that had just unmade my world. 7 words that felt more final than a flatline. My name is Janelle. I am 29 years old, and for the last 7 of those years, I've been a pediatric nurse. Corey was 32. We had been married for 4 years, together for 6. Long enough to build a life, or so I thought. Long enough to believe the foundation was solid. In my line of work, you learn to differentiate between a crisis and a condition. A crisis is acute, a sudden event that demands immediate, decisive action, a respiratory arrest, a seizure. It's loud, chaotic, and frightening, but it has a clear protocol. A condition is chronic. It's a slow, quiet erosion of a system. It's the subtle drop in oxygen saturation over hours, the gradual weight loss, the fatigue that becomes a baseline. People can live with a condition for years, adapting to it so slowly they forget what it felt like to be truly healthy. They learn to function with less. They mistake endurance for wellness. My marriage, I realized in that sterile, silent moment, had not been in crisis. It had been a condition. And Corey's text message was not the cause of death. It was just the time of it. The inciting wound wasn't just the action itself, the giving away of my dog without my consent. It was the language he used to deliver it. It's done. The finality of a business transaction. The pronouncement of a king who had issued a decree, a man who believed his authority was absolute and his judgment unquestionable. He hadn't said, "We need to talk." He hadn't said, "I did something and I need to explain." He had said, "It is done." As if my input was never a variable in the equation. Then came the second part, the part that twisted the knife. "You'll thank me. You were too emotional about it." He wasn't just taking something from me, he was framing it as a favor. He was diagnosing my love as a sickness, my grief as a symptom, and his betrayal as the cure. My feelings were not a valid response to be considered. They were a problem to be solved. And he, in his infinite wisdom, had solved it. He had amputated a part of my heart and called it healing. In that moment, staring at the phone under the fluorescent lights of the hospital, I understood that he didn't just disagree with my feelings, he fundamentally disrespected their right to exist. To him, my love for Buster was an irrational, inconvenient feminine trait, like a tendency to cry at movies or an affinity for decorative pillows. It was something to be managed, and if it couldn't be managed, it was to be removed. The archaeology of our disrespect began long before that text message. To understand why he thought he had the right to do it, you have to understand the ground he was standing on, ground I had unwittingly tilled and fertilized for him over the years. You have to understand Buster. I found Buster, or maybe he found me, 5 years ago, a year before Corey and I were married. He was a scruffy terrier mix at a shelter, all wiry fur and impossibly hopeful brown eyes. He'd been found wandering near the ship channel, skinny and scared. I was just there to look, a dangerous verb in a place filled with cages. But when he pressed his head against the wire of his kennel, he let out a soft whine that sounded less like a request and more like a recognition. I took him home that day. He was mine. He was the warm weight at the foot of my bed on lonely nights, the frantic, joyful welcome at the door after a brutal shift. He was the silent witness to my tears when my mother was sick, the steady, breathing presence that reminded me I wasn't alone. When Corey moved in, Buster was part of the deal. At first, Corey seemed to embrace it. He posted pictures of them on Instagram, captioned "my boys," and threw the ball for him at the park. He performed the role of a dog lover convincingly, but performance is not the same as practice. The daily work of caring for a living creature, the walks in the rain, the feeding schedules, the vet appointments, fell to me. I didn't mind. It was a labor of love, and love, I thought, didn't keep a ledger. Then, 2 years ago, Corey was laid off from his sales job. It was a blow to his pride, and I went into what I now recognize as my default setting, nurse mode. I assessed the situation, identified the needs, and created a care plan. I told him not to worry, that my salary could cover us until he got back on his feet, and it did. For 14 months, my modest $62,000 salary became the sole infrastructure of our lives. I paid the rent on our apartment in the Heights. I paid the car notes for both of our cars. I paid the utilities, the groceries, the internet bill. I managed the budget with the same precision I used for titrating medication, making sure every dollar went where it needed to go. And when Buster got an ear infection, and then later when he needed a dental cleaning, it was my debit card that I handed to the vet's receptionist without a second thought. Corey was grateful at first. He'd kiss my forehead and say, "Thank you, baby. I don't know what I'd do without you." But over time, gratitude curdled into expectation. My support was no longer a gift. It was a utility, as reliable and invisible as the electricity humming in the walls. He stopped looking for work with the same urgency. He started spending his days gaming and his evenings out with friends who were still employed. One of those friends was Devin. Devin was a co-worker from his old job, a man who spoke in absolutes and treated his opinions like facts. Corey began to come home with what I called Devin's decrees. They were little nuggets of borrowed wisdom that Corey would present as his own epiphanies. "Devin says a man's real value is in his network, not his 9 to 5, he'd announce after a night of drinks. "Devin thinks this whole foodie scene is overblown. A man needs a steak." I would just nod, too tired from my shift to deconstruct the secondhand machismo. Then, Devin's decrees started to involve our home, specifically Buster. "You know, Devin was saying how pets are really just a woman thing," Corey said one evening, watching me fill Buster's food bowl. "He says it's like a practice baby, keeps you busy." I remember pausing, the scoop of kibble halfway to the bowl. "He's not a thing, Corey. He's our dog." Right, your dog," he corrected himself, a small but significant shift in language. From that point on, Buster's existence became a point of friction. His joyful barking when I came home was a nuisance. The cost of his vet bills was a drain. The space his bed took up in the living room was clutter. Each complaint was a subtle recategorization, moving Buster from a beloved family member to an inconvenient accessory, my inconvenient accessory. Corey would often echo Devon's logic verbatim. Devon told me he'd never let a pet get in the way of his focus. A man's got to be thinking about his legacy, his career. A dog is a distraction. I would try to argue, to explain that Buster wasn't a distraction but an addition, a source of joy and comfort. But my explanations were always met with the same placating, dismissive tone. I get it, you're attached. You're just emotional about it. My emotion was the problem. My love was the thing that needed to be managed. His logic, borrowed though it was presented as the calm, rational center. It was a classic rhetorical trap. By defining my position as emotional, he automatically defined his own as logical, regardless of its merits. It was condescension disguised as concern. I have a memory, one I used to treasure, of the three of us at Memorial Park about a year ago. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the fields. I was throwing a worn tennis ball for Buster, and he was leaping into the air, a blur of pure, unadulterated joy. Corey was sitting on the blanket, smiling. I took a picture of him, the perfect image of a happy husband watching his wife and dog. But looking back now, I see the contaminated truth. His phone was in his other hand, just out of frame. He wasn't watching us. He was scrolling. The smile was a performance for the picture I was taking. He was present in body but absent in spirit, a spectator at his own life. The memory is poisoned now. The golden light seems artificial. The joy feels staged. He wasn't sharing the moment with me. He was allowing me to have it, waiting for it to be over. My complicity in all of this is something I have had to face. I let him get away with it. I absorbed the little dismissals, the subtle erosions of respect, because I believed that was the work of a long-term partnership. You make allowances. You accommodate. You don't pick every battle. I was the designated peacekeeper, the manager of our domestic climate. I'd steer conversations away from conflict. I'd swallow my irritation when he'd leave his dishes in the sink right after I'd cleaned the kitchen. I'd pretend not to notice when he'd spend our shared money on a new gadget while I was carefully budgeting for our groceries. I was so busy managing the condition, treating the symptoms, that I failed to see how sick the patient truly was. I thought I was demonstrating patience. He interpreted it as permission. The drive home from the hospital was a blur. My hands were steady on the wheel, a muscle memory from years of high-stakes work. But inside, a fine tremor had started, a vibration deep in my bones. I was operating on a kind of professional autopilot, the detached calm I accessed during a code blue. Assess, stabilize, act. Do not panic. Panic clouds judgment. I kept rereading the text, as if a different combination of the same letters would appear. It's done. You'll thank me. You were too emotional about it. I walked into our apartment and the silence hit me first. It was a dead, empty silence, not the peaceful quiet of an empty home. It was the silence of absence. Buster's water bowl was gone from its spot by the kitchen island. His favorite squeaky toy, a worn-out hedgehog, was missing from the floor. My eyes went to the corner of the living room. His corner. The comfortable round dog bed where he slept, where he'd watch me cook, where he'd rest his head on my lap while I read. It was gone. The space wasn't empty. In its place was a large, flat-packed cardboard box. The branding was sleek, black and red. It was a gaming chair. One of those expensive, ergonomic models Corey had been talking about for months. The kind Devon had. He hadn't just removed my dog. He had replaced him. In the span of a single afternoon, he had erased a 5-year history of love and companionship and installed an upgrade for his hobby. That was the moment of clarity. It was sharp and cold and absolute. As a nurse, I know that sometimes a diagnosis isn't made from a single dramatic symptom, but from a constellation of small, seemingly unrelated data points that suddenly form a coherent, undeniable pattern when you see them on a single chart. The dismissiveness, the borrowed opinions, the financial dependency, the casual cruelty of the text message, and now, the gaming chair. It was the final, critical value that explained everything else. The system wasn't just sick, it was necrotic. The rot was too deep. You can't save tissue that's already dead. I didn't scream. I didn't throw something. I didn't cry. A strange, terrifying calm settled over me. It was the calm of a decision being made on a cellular level, far below the noisy surface of conscious thought. It was over. I felt the word, rather than thought it. Over. I walked into our bedroom and quietly closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed I had paid for, in the apartment I was paying for, and took out my phone. My hands were still trembling, but my fingers were precise. I scrolled to my cousin's name, Alani. She lived in New Orleans, a city that had always felt like a deep, soulful exhale. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Janelle, what's up?" Her voice was warm and familiar, a sound from a life that suddenly felt 1,000,000 miles away. My own voice came out even, almost monotone. "Lonnie, can I ask you a huge favor? Can I come and stay with you for a little while?" There was no hesitation in her voice, only a shift from warmth to a focused, protective concern. She'd always seen more than I was willing to admit. "Of course," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "What happened?" "Corey gave Buster away," I said. The words sounded insane, even to me, like a line from a bad movie. There was a beat of silence on her end, and then she said, with a quiet fury that was more validating than any shout could have been, "I'm on my way to buy you a bottle of your favorite wine. The door will be open when you get here. Drive safe." She didn't ask why or what I was going to do. She didn't tell me to think it over. She just heard the truth and acted. She was a steady witness. That was all I needed. After I hung up, I stood and walked to the closet. I pulled out my 2 largest suitcases and laid them on the bed. I began to pack with a methodical efficiency I had learned on the ward. I was preparing a sterile field for a new life. I folded my scrubs, my jeans, my sweaters. I gathered my toiletries from the bathroom, leaving his untouched on his side of the sink. I packed my nursing school textbooks, my grandmother's jewelry box, the framed photos from my desk at work. I took the small worn photo album filled with pictures of Buster. Buster as a puppy, Buster covered in mud, Buster asleep on my chest. As I was packing, my phone buzzed again. It was Corey. "Are you home? Let's not make a big deal out of this." He was already managing the narrative, de-escalating a crisis he had created. He wanted to skip the part where he was held accountable and fast forward to the part where I calmed down and accepted his decision. He wanted me to absorb the blow and then soothe the hand that struck it. I looked at the message, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it, and I felt nothing but a profound and weary distance. I did not answer. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, collecting the pieces of my life. I left his things exactly as they were. His clothes in the closet, his video games stacked by the television, his expensive sneakers lined up by the door. I wanted him to come home not to a scene of destruction, but to a scene of precision. I wanted him to see that this was not an act of passion. It was a surgical procedure. I zipped the suitcases and carried them, one by one, to my car. I put them in the trunk and then came back inside for one last look. The apartment we had shared for 4 years already felt alien. The furniture we had picked out together looked like a set on a stage. The life I had lived there felt like it had happened to someone else. The only thing that felt real was the gaping hole in the corner of the living room, the space where the gaming chair box stood like a tombstone. My eyes caught on something by the front door. On a small brass hook, the one we used for keys and mail, hung Buster's leash. It was the red nylon one I'd bought him last Christmas. In his haste to erase the dog, Corey had forgotten to erase the evidence of him. The leash hung there, a silent, damning indictment. A symbol of all the walks we would never take again. A relic of a love he had deemed disposable. For a moment, I thought about taking it with me, but I stopped. Leaving it was a more powerful statement. I wanted him to see it every single day. I wanted it to be the last thing he saw when he left and the first thing he saw when he came home. A constant reminder of the life he had so casually discarded. I took out my phone, opened the camera, and took a single, clear picture of the red leash hanging on the hook. Then I walked out the door, closed it softly behind me, and did not lock it. He could have the keys. He could have the apartment. He could have the life we built. It was a structure with a faulty foundation, and I was no longer willing to be the load-bearing wall holding it up. I got in my car and started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking spot, I didn't look back. The 5-hour drive to New Orleans stretched before me, a ribbon of asphalt leading away from the rubble. For the first hour, I was numb, the trembling calm holding me together. But as I crossed the Texas-Louisiana state line, something broke. A sob tore its way out of my chest, raw and ragged. The grief I had been holding at bay, the grief for my dog, for my marriage, for the woman I had been who believed in endurance, it all came pouring out. I wept for the beautiful, trusting creature who was somewhere right now, scared and confused, wondering why I had abandoned him. I had failed to protect him. That was a truth I would have to learn to live with. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen, the tears washing away the shock and leaving behind the hard, clean ache of loss. Corey's escalation began, as I knew it would, with a flurry of digital noise. By the time I was halfway to Baton Rouge, I had 7 missed calls and 15 text messages. They were a perfect case study in the stages of panicked entitlement. First came the shock and denial. "Where are you? Janelle, pick up the phone. This isn't funny." He was operating from the baseline assumption that I was somewhere nearby, cooling off, and would soon return to my designated role. The idea that I had actually left had not yet penetrated his reality. When I didn't respond, his tone shifted to anger and accusation. "You are being so dramatic. This is a massive overreaction. It's a dog. Are you seriously leaving over a dog? Unbelievable. You're being manipulative, Janelle. You're doing this to punish me." It was all there. The gaslighting, the minimizing, the reframing of my pain as a weapon against him. My departure wasn't a consequence of his actions. It was a character flaw of mine. When anger didn't work, he moved on to recruiting allies. My phone rang, and it was my mother. I almost didn't answer, but I knew he would have spun a story that painted him as the concerned husband and me as the unstable wife. I took a deep breath and picked up. "Janelle, honey, Corey just called me. He's worried sick. He said you just disappeared." "I didn't disappear, Mom. I left. He gave Buster away." There was a pause. My mother had loved that dog. "He what?" He took him to a shelter while I was at work and then texted me about it. I came home and he'd already bought a new gaming chair to put in Buster's spot. The other end of the line was quiet for a long moment. Then my mother said, in a voice as solid as bedrock, "You drive safe. You hear me? Call me when you get to Alani's." She didn't need to hear his side of the story. She had just heard the truth. A week passed. I was cocooned in my cousin's apartment in the Marigny, sleeping on her couch, drinking the wine she'd bought, and slowly starting to breathe again. The texts from Corey continued, but their tone shifted again, this time to negotiation and false remorse. "Okay, I'm sorry. I get it. I shouldn't have done it without talking to you. That was wrong. Come home. We can talk this through. Please, Janelle. Maybe we can get another dog. We can go pick one out together." That last one was the most revealing. He thought the problem was the absence of a dog, not the nature of his betrayal. He thought Buster was a component that could be swapped out, like a dead battery. He didn't understand that it was Buster, that specific, scruffy, unconditionally loving soul, that had mattered. He didn't understand that the issue wasn't the dog. It was the unilateral power he had exerted over my heart. I finally responded, my first communication in a week. Another dog wouldn't be Buster. It was all I could trust myself to say. His response was to call immediately. I stared at his name on the screen, my heart pounding. Alani gave me a nod, a silent signal of support. I answered, "Janelle?" "Oh, thank God. Baby, I am so sorry. I miss you. This place is a mess without you." He sounded broken, and a part of me, the nurse, the caretaker, felt a dangerous pang of sympathy. But I stayed silent. I don't get it," he continued, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine confusion. "I was trying to do something good for us. I was trying to make our lives simpler. You were so stressed about him, about the money." "I was never stressed about the money for him, Corey," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I was stressed about the money for us because I was the only one paying the bills." The line went quiet. He hadn't expected that. He had expected me to argue about the dog, to be emotional. I had brought up the ledger, the one I had never mentioned before. He started to stammer, to backtrack, but then the frustration broke through, the raw, unfiltered entitlement that had been hiding beneath the performance of remorse. "This is what I'm talking about," he burst out, his voice rising. "You're making this into some huge, complicated thing. It was just a dog, Janelle. You're proving my point." And there it was, the last line he would ever say to me that mattered. "You're proving my point." His point had been that I was too emotional. And my deep, profound, marriage-ending grief over his actions was, in his mind, the ultimate validation of those actions. He had set a fire and was blaming me for screaming about the heat. He wasn't sorry for the wound. He was annoyed by the sight of the blood. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. He did not see my pain as a consequence to regret, but as evidence to support his original thesis. I held the phone to my ear, the silence stretching between Houston and New Orleans. I could hear his ragged breathing. He was waiting for me to argue, to cry, to give him more emotion to pathologize. Instead, I asked a simple question, my voice as calm and steady as if I were asking a patient for their date of birth. "Proving what point, Corey?" He was flustered. That you let your feelings get out of control, that you're not rational about this." "I see," I said, and I did. I saw everything. I saw the 4 years of my life, the love I had given, the support I had provided, all of it reduced to an emotional overreaction. "There's nothing left to talk about," I said, and I ended the call. I blocked his number. It was done. Rebuilding is a quiet, unglamorous process. It's not a montage. It's a series of small, deliberate actions. I found a lawyer in New Orleans who specialized in interstate divorce. The process was surprisingly clean. Since I had been the sole provider for over a year, and since we had few shared assets, there was little for him to contest. He had built his comfort on my foundation, and when I withdrew it, he had nothing to stand on. I transferred my nursing license to Louisiana and got a job at a children's hospital in Uptown. The work was familiar, a steady rhythm in the chaos of my new life. I loved the resilience of the children, their capacity for trust and joy even in the face of illness. They reminded me of what it was to have a heart that was open, even when it was hurting. I lived with Alani for 6 months, saving every penny I could. I found a financial advisor who helped me understand my own money I had always thought of as ours. She showed me how to build my credit, how to invest, how to plan. It turned out the skills I used to manage our household budget made me a natural at managing my own future. After the divorce was finalized, I qualified for a first-time homebuyers program. I found a small 2-bedroom townhouse in a quiet neighborhood with a tiny, fenced-in backyard. The day I got the keys, I walked through the empty rooms and the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of possibility. It was mine. 2 weeks later, I drove to the Louisiana SPCA. I walked through the kennels, my heart aching with a familiar mix of hope and sadness. I wasn't looking for a replacement for Buster. I was looking to offer a home, a safe place. And then I saw them. A bonded pair, a scruffy gray terrier mix, and a gentle, floppy-eared hound. Their information card said they had been surrendered together and had to be adopted together, which was why they kept being overlooked. They were a package deal. They were huddled together in the back of the kennel, the terrier protectively shielding the hound. I sat on the floor in front of their cage for nearly an hour, just talking to them softly. Eventually, the terrier crept forward and licked my hand through the wire. I named them Louis and Ella. The vindication I felt wasn't in Corey's loss, but in my own reclamation. It was in the quiet evenings on my own couch, with Louis's head in my lap and Ella's warm weight against my feet. It was in the sound of their tags jingling as they chased a ball in my backyard. It was the simple, profound act of providing care and protection for a living creature, not as a performance or an obligation, but as an expression of love. I hadn't just rebuilt a life, I had restored a principle. About a year after I left, I had to return to Houston to sign the final closing documents for the sale of our old apartment. I was only in town for a day. I stopped at a coffee shop near my lawyer's office, and as I was waiting for my order, I saw him. Corey. He was standing in line a few people behind me. He looked ordinary, smaller than I remembered. The larger-than-life figure who had dominated my world had shrunk to the size of a regular man in a coffee shop. He saw me at the same moment. A flicker of something, shock, regret, I couldn't tell, crossed his face. He walked over to me. "Janelle," he said. His voice was quiet. "Corey," I replied, my tone civil, neutral. "Wow, you look great." "I'm doing well," I said. It was the simple, unvarnished truth. He fidgeted, looking for words. I heard you moved to New Orleans for good." "That's right. I bought a place." His eyes widened slightly. The idea of me owning property on my own was clearly something that had never occurred to him. "Oh, good for you. That's great." An awkward silence hung between us. He looked like he wanted to say more, to launch into one of the speeches I was sure he had rehearsed. Speeches filled with apologies that were really just pleas for his own absolution. But something in my posture, in my calm, steady gaze, must have told him that the courtroom was closed. The verdict was in. "Well," he said finally, "it was good to see you." "You too, Corey," I said. And I turned, picked up my coffee, and walked out the door into the Houston sunshine, feeling nothing but the quiet hum of my own peaceful life. In nursing, you learn that some systems can't be saved. You can provide supportive care, you can manage symptoms, you can pour all of your energy and expertise into the fight, but sometimes the underlying condition is too pervasive, the cellular damage too complete. The kindest, most loving act in those moments is to allow for a peaceful end, to stop the interventions that are causing more pain than they are preventing. My marriage was a system that had failed. For years, I had been providing supportive care, mistaking my own endurance for the system's health. What Corey did wasn't the illness. It was a catastrophic symptom that revealed the truth of the diagnosis. The real wound wasn't the loss of my dog. It was the discovery that I was the only person in the relationship who considered my heart to be a vital organ. To him, it was a secondary system, a non-essential function whose distress signals could be safely ignored or even silenced for his own comfort and convenience. He thought love was a problem to be solved, an emotion to be managed. He never understood that love isn't the problem at all. It is the point. It is the central, steady, beating pulse that makes a house a home. He couldn't hear the rhythm of it until it was gone, and all he was left with was the silence. In the quiet of my own home, surrounded by the soft breathing of creatures I chose to protect, I finally understood that peace is not the absence of noise, but the presence of safety. I was finally safe. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.